going on, all you wonderful A-plusers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another Kamen Rider Saber review here for you guys. Yes, we had a little bit of a hiatus last week, and if you guys remember, the week before that was a very chill episode, so it's kind of been like I've had the last couple of weeks off from doing these reviews, even though I did technically review one last week. But it is cool that we're finally kind of back in the groove of things now, so the plot continues and it also seems to thicken. So it's like we're finally back into this for the most part. Now, there is something I noticed that was kind of different about the way they kind of structured this episode, and I'll definitely get into that. And this was a really good episode overall, but I definitely do have a few issues with a few of the directions that they kind of went with the writing in it. But for the most part, I did think it was a really fun episode, so let's get right into this. So the first thing I want to talk about in this show is Ren, because one thing I've kind of noticed is that he's really a lot more tolerable now. Like, if you guys remember my thoughts on him when he was first introduced into the show, I did not like him at all, and I thought what they were going to do with this character is have him kind of grow into like a more likable character over time, but instead it almost feels like however they wrote his character in his first introduction, it doesn't seem like the same character that we've been seeing throughout the rest of the show. Almost like after they kind of aired that episode, or after they played that episode back, it was like, well, it's too late to change anything, but at the same time, we're kind of seeing that this didn't work as well on paper as it does in execution. Maybe they changed it very last minute, but either way, I do prefer this version of Ren, where he is a little bit arrogant-ish. And I say ish because he has that moment where he says, oh yeah, Toma's amazing, although his swordplay could use a little more tune-up. But besides that, he is definitely a lot more likable now. Even though there wasn't really any character development to make him that way, I still prefer this version of Ren than the one that we got in the past. We then cut to a little bit of a side plot that does kind of pay off in the end, which is that Toma is trying to write a new book, but he currently is not sure what exactly it is that he wants to write about. As Calibur plans his next attack, we learn that the villains are not exactly getting along, but other than that, there's not really much else to this scene. Just kind of cool to see a little bit of conflict between the villains, I guess. We cut back to the North Pole and we see that Sophia reveals that she's always had this weird, strange feeling about Calibur. Gee, did you get that feeling when he betrayed all the other Kamen Riders? Or I don't know whatever gave you the idea that something might be off about Calibur, but good intuition, I guess. But anyways, her and Ogami seem to be talking about Calibur as Kento walks into the room, and they all kind of hesitate on whether or not they should keep the conversation going, which to me was kind of confusing because they've talked about Calibur in front of Kento many other times before this point, so it is kind of weird that they were hesitant to talk about him here. I mean, yeah, I get that it's Kento's dad, but I mean, they literally sent Kento to hold his dad off while Toma, pops into the other dimension to get like this all, powerful power-up thingamajig. So it really didn't make that much sense to me why they were keeping their conversation about it kind of hush-hush. Maybe that'll play out later on. I don't know. I have a theory as to why, but the ending almost completely disproves that theory, so but I'll get into that a little bit more later on. We then see our monster of the week, and it's a duck thingy. I guess the monsters in this episode kind of have a bird motif going, a scene that I thought was really weird. And again, this kind of goes to what I was mentioning earlier about the conversation and how they were trying to keep it very hush-hush from Kento. Basically, Toma asks where Ogami and Ren went, and Sophia doesn't really tell them. She just kind of says they have their own role to play in this whole thing, just like you guys do. And that's about it. And this has really no payoff. Again, debatably, you could say at the very end of the episode, but I'll get into that a little bit more of why I don't think that's the case. The writers head out to battle the monster of the week, but unfortunately Toma is unable to get Excalibur from Tensuro because he's busy analyzing it. The writers all battle the monsters of the week, but of course Calibur, like always, kind of comes in to make what would have been normally a very easy fight for them suddenly that much more difficult. But what does follow is some really awesome fight scenes, because we do get some moments where the writers are fighting in civilian mode. I don't know if there's a Kamen Rider term for that when they're basically fighting untransformed, so I'm just gonna go with the Power Ranger term and say that they're fighting in civilian mode, and it's pretty cool even though it is very brief. I bring this up only because it seems kind of rare that you see something like that in Kamen Rider, whereas in Power Rangers it happens like all the time, and it does happen pretty, like, not as often in Super Sentai, but it does happen occasionally in Super Sentai as well. We also get a really amazingly choreographed fight that involves using a drone as the camera, and it's all over the place, but it's so fantastic. I just absolutely love it when tokusatsus do these type of fight scenes. It just really gets me pumped up, you know, for every action scene. I feel like a little child, you know, just with watching the explosions and watching all the cool camera angles that they can get to with a drone. It's just beautiful. We then later on meet another new character, and we don't really learn anything about her until the very end, and even then what little we learn about her is just, you know, it's cool, but I kind of wish they waited at least an episode before revealing her, because it kind of just feels like they're just kind of once again like usual stacking more and more plot developments in every episode rather than kind of like unveiling one at a time. I know that a lot of people have been having this kind of issue with this season in particular, like saying that there's so much that they're packing into each individual episode rather than letting it unfold, and you know, I kind of do have to agree to an extent. I do kind of wish that the show didn't have so much being pushed into each individual episode at once, and rather just let each story play out and then maybe reveal a new writer every episode, you know, and then after all the writers are revealed, then start revealing a little more of the plot. I'll get a little more into this at the very end of the episode too, of why I think this is kind of becoming a little bit of an issue in this season, but nonetheless, it's not like it's completely taken away my enjoyment from the show, but it just means that I usually have to put a lot more effort into memorizing all this lore stuff that I normally don't have to when it comes to television shows. But meanwhile, in the fight, our heroes do finally kind of get their asses kicked by one of the birds in this group who paralyzes all of them. But worry not, because a new hero comes. Yes, it is Tetsuo, who arrives on the battlefield, but he now finally transforms into Kamen Rider Slash. Yes, I know a few episodes ago I said Kamen Rider Slasher. I'm sorry. I thought it was Slasher for some reason, but no, it's just Kamen Rider Slash. Although I think Slasher sounds cooler. I love his costume, by the way. It very much, with how colorful it is, it kind of reminds me of Kamen Rider X-Aid. And going back to more comparisons about Kamen Rider X-Aid, what I find really funny about his transformation too is very much like the main character in Kamen Rider X-Aid. When Tetsuo transforms, his whole personality changes. Like, he doesn't just put on a costume. It's like he's a completely different person, and I freaking love it. He's just having a blast like the entire time out on the battlefield, and I'm having a blast watching him, of course. The battle basically ends kind of the way you would expect. They defeat the monsters of the week, giant explosions, and of course Calibur escapes. Again. But that's not all. After the battle ends, Toma actually gets his memories back. Going back to what I was saying earlier in this review, the issue with packing so much lore into every individual episode is that moment like this, Toma getting these memories that have been lost to him for so long, it doesn't last very long, and it's not really that big of a moment in the grand scheme of things. Like, this should have been something that really, like, to my opinion, should have had its own whole like scene building up, like in the very beginning of an episode, and maybe it'll be in the next episode, maybe this will play out. But the way this episode ended is that it really comes off as, hey, this is the big reveal, you happy? Cool. And that's kind of it. And it's kind of a shame, because I feel like there should have been slightly more emotion behind this. We do get a little bit of an emotional moment between him when he's like calling, you know, Rintaro and Kento his friends, but it doesn't really have as big of an impact as I feel like it could have if they made this development like its own episode altogether. I feel like it all just kind of happening very last minute at the end of this episode was kind of a big letdown to me. But if the next episode does focus a little more on it, you can just pretend this complaint about the episode never happened, I guess. But we'll have to wait and see till next week before that. We also do get the reveal with the one random character that was kind of introduced. We do find out that she is in fact a Kamen Rider. Lastly, we get one final scene that confused the heck out of me because nothing gets accomplished, and it kind of felt like there was a lot more build up to this than what we actually got. Essentially, Sophia confronts a Kamen Rider Calibur, and it seems like she's trying to get information from him at first, or that she's trying to ambush him. But whatever it is that her plan was, it of course completely fails because essentially you have him attack her, and she's only saved very last minute by Ogami, who doesn't even show up transformed, which means he gets his ass absolutely handed to him, and of course Calibur escapes again. I'm just really confused on what her plan even was. At the very beginning of the episode, she says, oh, Ogami and Ren have their part to play, but first of all, we don't even see Ren at the very end of this episode, and second of all, if this was what you had planned for Ogami, that he could, you know, help you ambush Kamen Rider Calibur, or even just, you know, him there as a bodyguard, that wasn't a great plan if he's not going to be transformed, because of course, you know, you kind of risk not only endangering yourself but him as well if you try to face a transformed Kamen Rider when neither of you are transformed into Kamen Riders. So it was just a really bad last scene to the episode, kind of making what was a really good episode overall end on a really sour note. Now, there are a few other things I do want to talk about with this episode. Like I said, I thought the fight scenes were incredible in this episode, especially the scene that was filmed on a drone. I absolutely loved it. I also kind of liked how the episode was structured a little more than episodes that we've gotten in the past, because we do have a lot of slow moments in the very beginning of this episode, which I like, which you rarely get to see, but it's kind of just characters talking. Even if these scenes don't last long, I'm just glad that they're there. And I like how these go on without any interruptions of any fights. In fact, there was like a brief moment where I was actually kind of wondering, I wonder if there's going to be like very few fights in this episode. Now, of course, halfway through the episode, that completely changes, and it's just fight after fight after fight, and then there's a bit of exposition here and there in between those fights. But yeah, overall guys, this was a pretty good episode, despite some of the sour notes that kind of felt like they led up to nothing, and the other thing with the new character that I kind of wish they waited until at least the next episode to unveil. Even though that I've had all these issues with this episode, it's nowhere near as bad as it's been in the beginning of this season, where it's just exposition dump after exposition dump, and they're all done like way too fast too, and so it's hard to keep up with all of them. It does feel like they're giving us fewer of them, but it's still kind of the same thing where they're still there and they're very fast paced. So I do kind of hope that later on we can get less of them, so they can like actually develop these exposition dumps rather than just throwing them out there and having them get solved in the very next episode. But guys, at the very end of the day, these are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know in the comments below if you guys like this episode or not. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you like the content that we give you on this channel, definitely hit that notification bell and you will be notified whenever we drop new content. But guys, above all, just remember, keep it A+.